Hello and welcome to the Great Canadian Tour. I'm Glen McInnis. Well, today we come to you from Quebec City.
Back in 1608, French explorer Samuel de Champlain arrived here in Quebec City. To him, it was the ideal location, the perfect spot along the St. Lawrence River, and definitely the best place to settle. Well, 400 years after his arrival, we celebrate the rich history of Quebec City.
Fireworks commemorate the 400th birthday of Quebec City. By 1663, some 550 people were living in Quebec City, while 1,400 were found in the surrounding countryside. Quebec officially became the capital of New France in 1663. The seat of government and an administrative, judicial, and business center, the city also played an important role in religious affairs. Once King Louis XIV took an interest in New France, colonization proceeded, and by the end of the 17th century, much progress was made. Samuel de Champlain has been called the father of New France. He was a sailor, a navigator, and a cartographer, and he founded Quebec City. André Charbonneau is the chief historian for Parks Canada in Quebec. He takes us back in time to tell us the 400-year history of Quebec City.
We're going to talk about why Champlain chose this spot in particular. Why here?
Why he chose Quebec City? He knew that place. He knew certainly that it was a very good place for commerce, to make exchange with the Indian and so on. And he chose it also, in my view, because of strategic importance of the place. And the reality of this matter, of this fact, is the fact that he decided to develop Fort St. Louis over the hill in 1620 that could allow him to, with the gun over there, to control all the navigation over the river.
So, Andre, this is where the settlement actually began. We're looking at the circle right here on the pavement, and tell me about it. It's
yes,
pretty significant.
Yes, exactly. It's the trace just underneath the pavement that of the second habitation of Champlain that he built in 1626. But the first habitation, when he came in 1608, was exactly the same location, just here before church, what is now Church Notre-Dame-des-Victoires, but it's the very first establishment of Champlain in New France here. So on the 3rd of July in 1608, he chose his spot, obviously for economic reason, but also for, I think, strategic reason, because of its capacity to defend the smallest establishment, the small habitation in these early times.
In 1629, Quebec was suddenly captured by the English. Champlain was exiled to England for 4 years. New France was restored to the French in 1632. Champlain returned. Between 1663 and 1673, the French king sent between 700 and 900 French women to start families in an attempt to further populate New France. They were called filles du roi, or women of the king. October 1690, the Battle of Quebec was fought between the colonies of New France and Massachusetts. The city's defenses were tested, and they succeeded sending the attackers south.
By the summer of 1759, Quebec City was being bombarded relentlessly. M.H.M.C.M had set up fortifications at Beauport to head off the British. But the British took another route and caught the French completely by surprise. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham during the 7 Years' War was definitely the turning point. British troops, led by General Wolfe, defeated French troops under the command of General Montcalm. The city was seized, and France ceded New France to Great Britain.
Fast forward nearly 170 years. During the Second World War, Quebec City was the site of 2 historic conferences. The first one was held in 1943 with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, William Lyon Mackenzie King, and T.V. Soong, China's Minister of Foreign Affairs. The second one was held in 1944 and was attended by Churchill, Mackenzie King, and Roosevelt. They took place in the buildings of the Citadel and the nearby Chateau Frontenac. A large part of the D-Day landing plans were made during those meetings.
UNESCO designated Quebec as a World Heritage in 1985. So since that time, all the governments like federal governments, with Parks Canada, the provincial government, and the municipal government are working together to conserve, to protect this wall, and to interpret it to the visitors of the city, of the country, of the world, and of the world.
Because there's not many things in Canada that are this old.
Yes, this is the oldest permanent city in Canada, and in Quebec, the characteristic of the city is the fact that Quebec has, throughout the ages, kept many part of his heritage.
And history is most evident in its beautifully preserved fortifications that date from the early 17th century. As the only remaining walled city in North America, Quebec has been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These walls have seen 3 centuries of Quebec's military past.
And if you want an idea what life was like in Quebec during the 19th and early 20th centuries, then artwork may be the way to do it. And the place you can see that is the Musée Place Royale, here in the heart of old Quebec.
Artist Jeanette Leblanc tells the story of Quebec through art. Carl Tremblay is the spokesperson for this museum.
Carl, we have some great artwork in here. Jeanette Leblanc is the artist, and it has a neat twist to it, and I want you to tell me about that.
Yeah, well, Jeanette Leblanc is born here in Quebec City, and she's been doing this for about 35 years. And her special talent is she recycles huge, beautiful antiques. Most of them are over 100 years old. And not only does she recycle them, but she brings them back to life by telling a story. I have a couple of examples that I could show you. Right over on my left there's a huge painting of Place Royale, which is where we are. Place Royale is the oldest part of Quebec City. And the scene we're looking at is coming out of the midnight mass on Christmas Eve. Here in Quebec City, this was a tradition. Everybody from the entire community would gather at the midnight mass and then chat outside for 30 minutes, you know, just wishing everybody best. And this is absolutely remarkable.
We also go through all the different, a few different eras. When do we start?
Well, the paintings, the story she's telling is between about 1880 and 1920, I would say. And there are actual scenes that have taken place. Some of them are even documented. I give you an example of the town crier. This happened a lot back in those days. There was no newspapers, and so the town crier would come into the square and tell everybody the news, you know.
Now, some of her paintings also depict Quebec legends, which is a big part of the culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have one, for example, it's called the Chasse Galerie. It's up on the 3rd floor. The painting, what you see is you see a bunch of guys in a canoe flying over a city. Now, the Chasse Galerie is a legend about these lumberjacks that were stuck in the woods because they used to go for 2-3 months at a time, but without coming home. And this was around Christmas time, so they wanted to come home for Christmas and see their wives and kids, you know. And they'd been drinking a lot, so apparently the legend goes that they sold their souls to the devil, and he agreed to fly them to their community, see their children and wives, and then fly them back. We have been saving up for over almost 3 years. Normally we would sell these as she brought them in, but we've been saving up because the 400th anniversary is supposed to be about the history of Quebec City. And all her paintings, every single one of them, is a historical event that happened in Quebec City. The scenes are almost alive, you know, with history. You can almost guess what the people are saying and so on. And we wanted everybody, because during the 400th anniversary, there's going to be people coming in from all over Europe, all over the States. And to just walk around is one thing. But to actually look at these paintings, then you get the real feel of what Quebec City is all about. You know, she really brings life back to the old days and to the paintings themselves.
400th birthdays don't come that often, and the spirit of the celebration is shared by the people both from Quebec and from all over Canada and the world.
What makes your part of Canada so unique?
Well, this is just the jewel of civilization in North America, French civilization, I would say, and it's just extremely beautiful. It's just beauty everywhere.
It's Quebec. It's the 400th birthday anniversary. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and it's nice to take a walk in the town.
It's just the old buildings. They don't rip them down. They just keep them, and it's just the history for everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, for me, it's the language, because where we come from, we don't hear French that often.
You're from Edmonton.
We're from Edmonton, Alberta, and yeah, it's almost like being in Europe or some different country, not your own.
Definitely, sir.
Well, so many people across Canada have French roots, and so our roots way back to 1650s are French, and so coming here through that 12-foot protected brick wall, it just feels like back somewhere where I should be or something. There's a feeling to it.
Got a lot more history than other parts of Canada, I think, in terms of what's survived. So.
Sir, what do you think of it?
I quite like the fact that though we live somewhere that's quite close to France, this is probably the first time in years I've actually tried to speak in French. In Europe you find that everybody speaks English, whereas here it's been the first time we've really been challenged to try and use the little French that we have, so it's been quite good.
Cobblestone streets, history, culture.
People of this country is so nice.
The river or the lake. Yeah, like that part.
The river part, the St. Lawrence River part?
Yeah.
Pretty cool, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of history happened there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was going to say, history.
Yeah? You think the history's a big part?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And the parliament and stuff.
The Parliament buildings here, are beautiful. Anything else?
And the flowers.
And the flowers. Who do you think is the most influential Canadian politician of all time?
I would say Trudeau, right away.
Why?
Why, he knew what he wanted. He had a knack of talking to us. He had a knack of making a decision that were not always popular, but I think they were made for the good of all of us. And I think to me, there's no doubt to your question that Trudeau was the best.
Pierre Trudeau. Just because he had flair, he gave the West the bird. If you're a politician and you're willing to let your personality bubble up to the point where you're willing to give a gesture to another part of the nation, it means you're not all about spin. And I think most politicians are, so it's nice to know what you can judge a book by its cover, and if the cover's at least transparent.
Maybe Sir John A. Macdonald, because the railway linked our nation, and he was the guy that really pushed that and brought us together from east to west.
I would have to say Pierre Trudeau.
Why?
I just think he appealed to the masses.
And to the youth. Yeah. And to the youth. And he was, not only was he progressive and was kind of, had different ideas, but he was his own person and he had a personality. He was like a rock star. He appealed to everybody. He was my father's favorite person and my cousin's favorite person,
Trudeau, Pierre Elliott,
yeah,
Yves
right.
Trudeau. Yeah, and that not only was he this brilliant man and Renaissance man, but he'd tell you to fuddle-duddle if you needed to as well.
I'd say definitely Pierre Elliott Trudeau because he's just been so important for our our nationality as Canadians, seen all over the world as an important country.
During the reign of Adolf Hitler in World War II, millions of Jews were sent to their deaths in Nazi concentration camps. But there were, of course, survivors. And today, Montreal has the third largest population of Holocaust survivors in the world. The Holocaust Memorial Museum is located on the Montreal Jewish Community Campus. And it not only teaches people the horrors of the Holocaust, but also how to cope with racial intolerance in a modern age.
Founded 30 years ago, the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center is one of a kind. It houses over 400 original artifacts, 370 photographs, and 20 films, all of them telling the story of the Shoah. Hundreds of haunting testimonies from survivors fill the walls of the museum, Holocaust survivors who have made Montreal their home. Marcia Schuster is the Vice President of the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center.
Marcia, this is the first part of the museum. It depicts life for the Jewish people in Europe before the war. Was life good? How was life?
Well, the experience of Jews varied, and therefore this section concentrates on Jewish life, the vitality and diversity of Jewish life in Eastern, Western, and Central Europe, and the other areas where Jews lived. It also shows the diversity in economics, in religious issues. There were Orthodox, secular. There were educated, non-educated. There were rich and poor Jews. Although the Jews represented only 1% of the German population, being 500,000, they were very well represented in the sciences, as you can see, Albert Einstein, in the arts, Max Liebermann, and even in Parliament with Walter Rathenau. In addition, between 1901 and 1933, 11 of the 37 Nobel Prize winners were Jewish. Because of the fear of communism, the Nazi Party slowly creeps into Nazi politics, and Hitler and the Nazis, in the beginning of 1924, begin their rise. And you can see a ballot, an original, marked X for Hitler, remembering that this was a democracy. The end of democracy occurs with Hitler becoming Führer after Hindenburg's death.
So in that era, too, then follows the initial persecution of
the
Jews?
Beginning of the anti-Jewish laws. When you're dealing with a population that is trying to look at what's happening around them, their economic situation is not getting any better, but the realization of them becoming a nation is exemplified in these pictures with uniforms and grandeur. But we start to infiltrate propaganda with young children. One example would be this board game, very much representative of our Snakes and Ladders or Lollipops, Candyland, where the idea is to get the Jewish properties out. Those are the little circles. And the winner would be the person that gets most of the Jewish properties and getting the Jews out. This was an extremely popular game, and hundreds of thousands were sold and distributed throughout. In addition, you have a storybook here, which could have been read in the classroom or could have been read at night by a parent, where it shows the tall Aryan blonde man with a spade who's going to contribute to the land, and the almost cartoonish figure of the Jew, fat, swarthy, carrying money, and a very negative image. So children at a very early age were to understand that the Jew wasn't worthy, he was suspect, and therefore they were taught and started to understand that the Jewish existence was not something that Germany would want to have. Oddly enough, Shanghai became a haven for 20,000 Jews who lived side by side with the Chinese, who were at war with the Japanese.
In the 1930s, Canada closed its doors to refugees. In 1938, Prime Minister Mackenzie King said, quote, "Admission of refugees perhaps posed a greater menace to Canada than did Hitler." One Canadian official said that no Jews was still too many. It was a dark part of Canadian history.
November 9th and 10th, 1938 is referred to as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. The Nazi unleashed their venom, ransacking 1,400 synagogues in Austria and Germany, countless stores, homes. They took over 30,000 men and boys and sent them to concentration camps. And the Jews were taxed to rebuild these properties. This was the pivotal event which the Nazis produced, and they got absolutely no world response to this. So one may say that this set the wheels in motion for the Nazis to start thinking as to how far they could go. This picture is a street in the Warsaw Ghetto. The ghettos were areas in different cities, the poorest areas where the Jews were herded, where they were incarcerated. In this particular area, there was no electricity, there was no heat. People died of various diseases, of starvation. There was slave labor. There was very little to eat. And one may look at these gentlemen who look rather well dressed. They may have come in looking like that, but would end up as the others in the picture.
So the mass murders finally began.
The mass murders begin with the Einsatzgruppen following the troops into the Soviet Union, where millions are killed and the concentration camps are developed. And as you can see from the map, the major camps are easily accessible by railway, and you have the subsidiary killing camps as well.
You have a lot of artifacts here in the museum, and I mean, this is absolutely heartbreaking, and it's fascinating at the same time, but these are actual clothes worn by Jewish concentration camp prisoners.
Yes, the dress is a woman's dress, and the jacket, though it looks very small, is a man's jacket. The hat comes from a labor camp.
Mayor and Rena Schondorf are Holocaust survivors. They tell their story.
Mr. and Mrs. Schondorf, I first want to thank you very much for coming out and talking to us today. You were children during World War II and during the Holocaust. I first want you to tell me how this all began for you.
For me, I was born in Krakow, Poland. Krakow was at one point supposed to be Judenrein or so on. There was a general governor, Frank, who did not want to have the Jews in Krakow, but he didn't get rid of us altogether. I was all of 10 years old. The first thing that started, which I could not comprehend or understand, was that I was thrown out of school for no reason. Slowly, also part of the people that I knew began to disappear. We were put into a place which was covered around with barbed wires, which was the ghetto of Krakow. I was lucky enough that I was with my mother all of the time. My sister and my grandmother were with us. Even my father went into the Camp Płaszów, which is quite well known because of Schindler's List. This is the same camp. I was in that camp till 1944 fall. Part of the people were taken away in summer of 1944 because you already heard the Russian army approaching. Part of my job in cleaning the camp, or so-called cleaning the camp, was not destroying barracks or carrying wood or anything of that sort, but digging up mass graves and burning the bodies. Now, when there were any alarm that there were planes going to were flying, or there was afraid of bombing and so on, since we were very close to a railroad tracks and so on, all of us were put into a warehouse sitting on munition boxes. The Germans went into hiding in bunkers. Now you can imagine how happy we were to hear the planes flying. We sat on the hand grenades and munition, where any minute we could be really blown up, and we were singing. We were singing because we felt that by now there was a chance that we would survive. And we did. We were liberated by the Americans and made eventually our way back to Krakow because we wanted to know who survived. My father did not survive. Naturally, my grandmother didn't survive. Quite a number of members of my family, most of my father's family did not survive, or all of them, as far as I know. But I was with my mother, and my sister survived as well. in 1948, I arrived in Canada.
Mr. Schondorf, where were your beginnings?
I was born in eastern Slovakia, a small town called Bardiov, which had a population of approximately 10,000. 4,000 of them were Jews. In 1939, when Slovakia joined the Axis, various edicts took place against the Jews, culminating by 1942 expulsion of all the Jews. They kept back approximately 100 families whom they deemed to be of economic importance. Fortunately, my family fell amongst these, and we were not deported immediately. We eventually were deported to Birkenau, Auschwitz, and from there on, I experienced the death march out of Auschwitz on January 18, 1945. It was a death march because anybody stumbled marching out of Auschwitz because of the Russian army approaching was immediately shot. And there were some young people that survived from 1942 to 1944. And they had various positions by that time as trustees, kapos, and so on and so forth. And from that moment on, wherever I was, I bumped into some of them, and because of the history of my family, who were very well known, very charitable, and very good people, they went out of their way to try and help that little boy. And from that moment on, I was just handed from one to the other. They had almost like a conspiracy amongst them that they're going to do everything possible to make sure that the little boy survives. And eventually, after the war, managed to return to my town, come to Canada among the very, very first ones in early 1948. And never forgot till today what it meant, what I experienced. Live it every single day, but try to educate as many children as I possibly can, wherever I'm asked to go to schools or to this museum, because we believe very, very strongly that only through education are we able to assure that a Holocaust such as it was during the Second World War can never occur again.
The survivors will continue to inspire and educate us, telling us their experiences from one of the cruelest and most incomprehensible human events in history. And they know that their children and their children's children will make sure these stories are never lost.